Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 295. Give them tools and let them build, part 5. This is the vocal freedom episode. In part 5, we are diving into the importance of a simple-to-understand system of vocal instruction for groups of beginners in particular, but we could even say advancing beginners. Many choir teachers say, "I am the only voice teacher many of my kids will ever have." I've said it. It's true in a sense. It's true in the sense that our kids oftentimes, most of them that we teach, and even adults that sing in our church choirs and community choirs, will never enter a private voice studio. And the only vocal instruction they are going to get is going to come from us, the choir director. So it's true in that sense. It's not true in the sense that a choir rehearsal is not the same as a voice lesson. A voice lesson is individually tailored to an individual person's brain and instrument, and I think it's a crucial distinction. Choir directors absolutely should study voice. We should take lessons, we should sing, and we should perform. It is crucial for us to know as much about the voice as voice teachers do, and many of us put in that work, and that's important. But how we apply that knowledge and convey it to students is very different. In this episode, we will break down classroom procedures and priorities that can allow us and our students to make the most of our time together. After all, in group instruction, it's about a lot more than just vocal ped nerdery. It's also psychology. We have to create the right mood in the room that is conducive to vocal freedom and a true sound laboratory where beginning and advancing singers feel free and safe to, in front of each other, experiment, make noises, as you're going to hear later in this episode with a flashback to Ken Bozeman, to make accidentally beautiful sounds. Get feedback on those sounds and take multiple practice swings. And there's my baseball coach mentality coming back in. And just like in part 4 of this series, the secret sauce is the sequence, the amount of repetitions that they're able to get, and the questions. Not only the ones we ask them after each repetition, but the ones they eventually start to learn to ask each other and ask themselves. So stick around for part 5. Your music program or event deserves a platform that does it all, without the extra costs. With Ludus, you get seamless ticketing, built-in marketing, powerful fundraising, and volunteer management, where volunteers can sign up, schedule shifts, and track hours with ease. Need to sell merchandise and concessions in person? Ludus Retail lets you log sales by each group, track inventory, keep everything organized. Hosting music lessons or theater camps? They have a classes feature, which makes registration and student tracking effortless. And it's free for your organization. Thousands of programs already trust Ludus because they help you focus on what matters most, the performance. If you haven't already, I really think it's time for you to ditch the bulky sight reading books, the paper, all of the things that are already in the kids' folders in your classroom because it's not customizable to what they need in the moment. Sight Reading Factory allows this and so much more. And then the work we do in the classroom can be customized to what they need in the music and the repertoire they're learning, and it can be customized to their current learning level as a group. So use the Choralosophy checkout code, Choralosophy. When you check out, it'll give you a 10% discount every time you get a membership for yourself and for all of your students, which is really, really important so they can do this at home. A big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons. So let's talk first about vocal freedom, since I chose to name this episode based on this concept rather than vocal pedagogy or teaching vocal technique or any of those things. That it's really related to that. But I think the vocal freedom concept not only captures what I'm really going for in this episode, but it also captures the psychological element that I discussed in the introduction to the show. Young singers in particular. And so I'm going to start with the beginners. We're going to talk about our 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th graders, depending on where a kid is in a process when they're singing in an ensemble with some type of an expectation for correctness for the very first time. They tend to immediately go into a place of second-guessing themselves and their own voice, and it's a very powerful mechanism that causes vocal freedom to be difficult. We all know this kid. We know the kid who comes into our choir class, and I call them the mouse voice kid, where it is like pulling teeth to get any kind of a sound that anyone could hear 5 feet away. Now, of course, with that kid, are there vocal technical things that could help them? Absolutely. Of course, we can talk about breathing, we can talk about resonant space, we can talk about coordinating the onset, and all of those different things that are super important to teach all the kids. Yes. However, I'm going to suggest that most of the mouse voice kids, when they come into a choir class for the very first time, it is not a vocal technical barrier that is causing that tiny little sound. It is psychological. It is a missing feeling of safety. And that has to be built. Now, one of the ways that we build that, of course, is by creating an ecosystem where this poster, you can see behind me if you're on the video, I've got it on my Choralosophy shop, and it's also hanging up in the room in my school, which is thank you for your mistake. That's an ecosystem. That is an ethos where it takes a while, it takes some time, but we are trying to convince kids that the mistake noise, the mistake that comes from cut loose and go for it, is incredibly valuable to the group, and it's also incredibly valuable to their ability to grow vocally. It's almost as if we have to brainwash them in this political environment. Of course, somebody could clip that and prove that I'm trying to brainwash their kids, but I would just say, yes, no, I'm absolutely trying to brainwash your kids into thinking that their voice is beautiful. That's what I'm trying to brainwash them into doing. And one of the ways that we do that is by making them out to be the hero when they take a big risk with their voice, when they are willing finally to cut loose and let a beautiful note come out. Especially then, what happens when they do that and it's wrong? It's fa, but it's supposed to be so, but they cut loose and went for it. How do we respond in that moment? Those are the types of moments that build this ecosystem. So in all of the parts of this series, you're hearing me talk about responding with questions rather than redirections. So in that moment, especially when I have the shy voice kid who is starting to develop that first time willingness to really go out there and go for it, I am not critiquing their vocal technique at that point. I am not even critiquing whether or not the note is right or not. That's not the point in that moment for that kid. What's exciting, or what should be and can be exciting in that moment, is I can hear you. Oh my goodness. Yes. Can you guys hear her? It's usually a girl, but not always. Can you guys hear him? That finally we have the voice we need, because that's really what it's all about. It's about convincing kids that their voice is necessary for what we are doing. And you can take that all the way down the list of all the psychological levels of what it means to be human, and especially a human adolescent. We are trying to convince them that their voice matters to what we are doing. And of course, they're going to also internalize that eventually to be I matter when I come into this classroom. So what we're trying to do there is get to the freedom, the vocal freedom of what it means to just be able to take a breath, have an idea of what it is that you're trying to sing, and have the sound just come out with no blockage, no impediment, no hesitation, no moment of, oh crap, I'm not sure if this is going to be right, because it's usually that moment of disconnection where the air just stops. And then that's usually where we get that breathy, unsupported, using words that, of course, voice teachers don't really like, the imprecise words. But what ends up happening is that there is some kind of a disruption between breath in and noise. And I don't think that that's a vocal technical problem for most kids. I think it's actually a psychological one. It's almost like, I picture it as like two people who arrive at a door at the same time, and there's that little, no, you first, you first, and there's that little moment. It's a fraction of a second for kids when they're learning to sing, but where that hesitation can be missed, I think, by the teacher if they don't know to look for it. It's not that they don't know how to sing. It's not that when they go out in the hall and they're not nervous, you might overhear them making these big, beautiful noises. And it's definitely not that they don't make loud noises when they're with their friends. But we can start to get the impression that that student has a tiny little voice that can't contribute much because they haven't been taught these concepts of vocal freedom. So again, earlier in the series, you're hearing things about learning how to decode and fluently work your way through rhythms and fluently work your way through pitches. And those things are connected to what I'm talking about now, too. And that's actually, as I create this series, one of the biggest challenges that I'm finding is figuring out a way to separate them into all these concepts, because really the concepts all work together. For example, if I'm not sure what this note is supposed to sound like when I sing it, as I take that breath, I'm not 100% sure that I'm shooting for, right, whatever the pitch is. I've got that pitch living in my brain. I am much more likely to make a sound with vocal freedom because I'm hearing the pattern, I'm hearing the tune in my head. I'm not waiting to start the breath and start singing and hope that a piano player plays it for me fractions of a second right before I sing, because that is our practice swing being interrupted. There is some moment of hesitation in there that is going to cause vocal freedom to be less easy to achieve, because we're waiting, we're responding, we're reacting, rather than having a proactive breath and an onset. So before we go too much further into this episode, there has been a lot of content on these concepts of group instruction and the ways that we can simplify the vocal mechanism part of what we're doing so that there are less misunderstandings, because of course the voice is so unique that if we give too much specific information that carries into kind of or conveys things that I think about when I sing, for example, that could really mess up 10 kids in the room because their voice is not going to function like mine does and their brain doesn't function like mine does. So we've done a lot of episodes about this group instruction concepts and the things that we feel like we can safely say in a choir rehearsal that aren't going to mess up a good portion of our kids while making some of them better. So I'm actually going to cut now to a flashback to 2 episodes that I think you're really going to enjoy this portion. And if you enjoy these portions, of course, go dig back into the archive for the full episodes. They are episode 140 and 160. 140 was Beth and I giving a presentation at Colorado Music Educators Convention several years ago, where we did a tandem presentation on the challenges of group vocal instruction. And then in episode 160, these are both very popular episodes that people have really enjoyed over the years. Episode 160 was with vocal acoustics expert Ken Bozeman, and he's a real big advocate, as I now am, especially after that episode, have been fully drinking the Kool-Aid for the last couple of years of the concepts related to vocal affect and using the speech voice, which for all of our shy kids comes out with almost perfect vocal freedom most of the time. People speak with more vocal freedom than they sing until they are taught and they can figure out how to connect the natural sounds of speech to their correlating singing counterparts. And it's a brilliant demonstration that he gives in that episode, and he has so many great examples. I'm going to let you hear some critical moments from both of those episodes, and then we'll get right back into the procedural aspects in the second part of this episode about how we implement these things in our curriculum.
I've been developing a list of things that choir directors say that are not helpful or could be said in a better way. And this has been going on for a couple of years. And I have been just keeping that list and then also writing down, what could they say instead? What are they saying? What does that actually mean? And what could they say instead? And this is something I've shared with Chris and we presented on before. I was nervous at first to share some of these things because these are things that people have taught and they have learned. And if their voice teacher said it or if their choir director said it, it's, like sacrosanct.
Are you saying my choir director is fallible?
They could be.
Okay, so let's dig in. So where's the challenge really in this topic? The challenge is that we are not trombones. We are not snare drums. Our band and orchestra colleagues don't necessarily have to deal with the same issues of variety that we do. In the instrumental classroom, there are many technical instructions that you could deliver that will truly be the same for every trombone in the room, for every snare drum in the room. Some schools have contracts with manufacturers. It's even coming from the same place, right? They are identical instruments. Is the psychology of the kid different? Yes, of course. Is the skill level of the kid different? Yes, of course. But the instrument is the same. When we in the vocal classroom, we're teaching different psychology, different skill level, but also completely different instruments for every single kid. And that's important to consider. The voices are as varied as the people in the room, and we don't realistically have time to be the voice teacher that Beth is for every kid in the room, right? So that's the challenge. We have to figure out a way, and this is kind of what Beth touched on a second ago, of how do I say a thing that isn't going to make 20 voices worse?
And that can apply to everyone in the room.
Yes.
Yes. Every body is different. Everyone is going to breathe a little bit differently. You can't use some approaches like, some teachers might say stand against a wall and for good posture, but some kids might have, a larger backside, and that's not going to help them with alignment. There are lots of things that are not going to apply to everyone in the room, and everyone is going to breathe a little differently. Everybody's pharynx is a different size, everyone's tongue is a different size. Everyone is going to have a slightly different approach, but ultimately everyone's goal is the same and everyone is working kind of with the same basic structure. So you have to make it so it can apply to everyone in the room.
The challenges are universal, but the way we can approach them are widely varied. And so I'm going to also suggest that this gap in our profession of knowing how to talk about these things could be because in a lot of places we're not taught how to do it. I know I got through all the way through undergrad without a vocal ped class, and because it wasn't offered or required and I didn't know to take it because no one told me. Even through my master's degree, I took one as an elective, and that's relatively common all over the country. If you had the opportunity to take a vocal ped class in undergrad, raise your hand. Was it required?
Yes.
That's excellent. That's excellent. That shows, because I'm old, that shows that there's progress.
But I also have to state the standard of the vocal ped class is not the same everywhere. And so, yeah. I mean, I have to say, I did take vocal ped in undergrad, but I don't feel like I learned enough. And then it was a performance degree, and it was required, but and then even after a master's degree in vocal performance, I still felt like I had lots of gaps. And so that continued, me striving for more information, attending more pedagogy summits and reading books and things like that. And I have changed my mind over time. I have definitely changed my mind about things and altered my approach with my students. So,
are you suggesting that voice science is a science-based, research-based field that keeps advancing even after we graduate?
It's so true. And not everyone agrees, not all professionals agree. And the more that I read and study, I just, it kind of makes your head explode. But the good thing is the more you read and the more you study, the more conviction you can have about your own ideas. And then you will feel more confident in what you are doing when you see what works and what does not work.
Yeah. Set this up, before. So this is a clip from an episode that I did a couple of years ago with Dr. Jamie Rhodes and Dr. Andrew Crane. And it was an episode that talks about this, and it was very helpful for people. But before Beth and I continue to set up this concept, I'm going to let them kind of talk about from the higher ed perspective just for a couple minutes of what how they've been approaching this topic as well.
I think sometimes as choral directors, when we have 60 throats doing 60 wrong things in front of us, one of the scary things is that you start to know, especially if you've done it for a while, you start to learn that the thing you say to help 20 of those throats do the right thing might be internalized by 20 others, and it makes it worse.
Exactly.
Because some of you never quite know how they're going to interpret what you say. Maybe they're already doing X, Y, and Z correctly, but then they hear the choral conductor's instructions to make it better, and then they overproduce or whatever. So what are some things that you guys have developed as a way to kind of think our way through that?
Well, I'll tell you where I kind of came to it for myself, because that was my realization. I was standing there in front of a whole bunch of kids and I was hearing individual issues. And after kind of like trying all the wrong things, which is what we do before we find the right ones, right? I started taking my own advice, and I found myself in my pedagogy classes where I was teaching budding teachers who would come to me and they would say, well, Dr. Rhodes, I'm a mezzo. What in the world do I do with a tenor? Like, I don't know how to teach a tenor. Or like, Dr. Rhodes, there's this like high soprano coming in and I'm a baritone. How do I deal with that? And I would find myself telling those students, you got to come back to the basics of how an instrument works. Like, yes, you might have a tenor in front of you, but it's a human being with a throat and a set of vocal folds and a tongue, and they are breathing and sending air out, and they're singing vowels, and your job is to get them to sing real vowels through a free tube, and that's your job. Whether it's a tenor or a baritone or soprano or a mezzo, you're dealing with basically the same anatomy, right? The sound is produced the same way at the very, very base level. Now, once you get out of the basics, it starts to get a little bit more individualized. And so eventually I sort of figured out that I could kind of take my own advice, and I had to sort of boil the craziness that becomes all the things we talk about with vocal technique kind of down to the very basic thing.
So I think what she's getting at there is really important, because we tend to mysticize a lot of what goes on with singing as if it isn't scientific. We also have trouble, I think, in our profession thinking about that basic level that you heard Dr. Rhodes just explaining there, which is that we are all human beings with the same body parts involved. And that also goes across genres as well. Go ahead.
It's scientific, but we're also making natural noises. We're making sounds that are expressions of emotion. So that's one thing I like to really talk to my students about. Like you're just making noises. You're speaking on pitch. You're crying. You're sighing in a healthy way. So science is good. I love science. That's great. But it's also important to let the kids know you're doing a natural phenomenon. People have been doing this for a long time. This is just, you need to go back to the phenomenon that it's a natural thing that people.
And the task is efficiency in the classroom with our language, right? So what, and we hinted at this before, we'll get to some of these things in the next couple slides. But this heading right here, but I had a great voice teacher, is not a substitute for what we're talking about right now. Because keep in mind, and the reason that's up there is because I get that a lot. So maybe we're approaching the way we teach in our classroom, the way we were taught, and maybe that's wrong, but maybe that's not because your voice teacher was wrong. Maybe it's because we're thinking about that the wrong way. Your voice teacher's job is to help you sing.
They're diagnosing your vocal flaws and helping you fix those and helping you sing in the most efficient way. That doesn't mean that necessarily you are equipped after that to teach others how to do it and diagnose those vocal flaws. It's a very different thing to learn how to sing and know how to use your own instrument and then to teach somebody else how to sing and use their instrument. So
yeah, and I made this yesterday. I talked a lot about with the literacy stuff, making sure to make it clear that I did it wrong for a long time also.
And everyone's vocal folds are a different size. You know, if you have a bigger voice, you have bigger vocal folds and you're going to feel resonance in a completely different way. And, you know, depending on your age, your vocal folds might not be able to close all the way.
My library of ways to talk about it was really what was deficient at that stage. And then, of course, like we said before, teaching a room full of people to sing the way you sing will most likely cause problems. And I think this is where it's really difficult for us to kind of swallow that bitter pill, is that there are some times that we are making our kids worse singers, which is why there is a stereotype out there where really, really advanced solo singers don't want to sing in choir. That maybe shouldn't be the case. So we have to simplify the message. There are some things that are true for everyone. Talk about alignment versus posture, Beth. Why do we?
Well, first of all, I don't really like the term posture, just because in my mind that's conducive to being stiff. I really like to use the term alignment.
If you've been dreaming about taking your student group on a trip, your choir, but you want it to be more than just a bus ride and a performance, you should check out Kaleidoscope Adventures. They've been planning exceptional student travel for more than 30 years, and they specialize in creating experiences that are both musically meaningful and logistically smooth. From performance opportunities to workshops and clinics, the Kaleidoscope Adventures team handles the details from start to finish, so you can focus on your singers. If you're ready to plan a trip that truly fits your choir, visit mykatrip.com or click the link in the show notes. When you're working with students to try in a practical context, trying to get young people, young adults, whoever it is that you're working with, to find these sounds, do you like to kind of play with the speech voice and integrate that into the singing voice? Is that a common thing for you? I know I like to do that in choir rehearsals a lot.
Yes, I do feel like at speech range, we can definitely start with just nicely formed speech level sounds and shapes and sensations. Then it's just a matter of knowing vowel by vowel when you have to start messing with that.
Do you have any favorite examples? So, for example, I'm going to give one of mine, and this might spur your thoughts here. So, I've used this on the show before. Always, I like to lead with a disclaimer. This is with love to my private school colleagues, but I use a voice that I like to call my private school voice when I'm trying to help. When I'm trying to help my young adolescent boys find a head resonance that is not necessarily normal for their cultural speech, but they can mimic it a whole lot easier than they can if I just say, "Hey, sing a D above a middle C" when you're 15 years old, and so are there expressions or different types of things that you like to use in your work with singers?
Yeah. So several comments about that. We are in a group of species called vocal learners. There are so far about 8 of those identified, and it's a really odd batch. Whales, seals, dolphins, bats, songbirds, hummingbirds. We're the only primates. And vocal learners, lots of creatures on the planet make noises, make sounds. Vocal learners is the subset that can learn new sounds and put them together in new patterns. So they can learn language, they can learn songs, they can learn complicated songs. And why do we care? Vocal learners' brains are wired a certain way. And how do vocal learners learn? By imitation and playful, pleasurable exploration. So what you did is you modeled for them a sound that with imitation and playful, pleasurable exploration, they can probably replicate, or they can gradually replicate better and better. This is how we learn to speak. This is how we learn tunes. The other piece to that is they tend to learn things in short segments. And this is good for learning repertoire, by the way. Learn a short segment, pleasurably repeat it till you really got it down, then another short segment, and then you can put them together in varying patterns. It's like improv, actually. That's how jazz improv works. People learn patterns, little short patterns, and then they put them together, scale forms patterns, and then their brain can mix and match and do all kinds of things with them. Anyway, now, and then the third piece was what I mentioned earlier. Voice is activated in response to the soul's impulse to express feelings. So you feelings as well as sort of caricaturing is what you were doing, right? So I combine those. So for example, here's one that I use that I got from a colleague in Boston, but I'm sure she got it somewhere else too. This is just things you grab from the culture, like you did with that one, which is the toddler, I want my mommy affect. I want my mommy. It completely throws me into my head voice, and I'm kind of, going into that, want my mommy. I want my mommy. That's one that I use. It will definitely throw you into laryngeal head voice, smoother registration, but I'm still using speech, so I'm getting my vowels, right? Another one that's not so good for that, but it's good for just exploring vibrator buzziness, which basically means high spectral content. If there's some buzz in the sound, you've got some high harmonics in the sound, which means good chord closure. It's not breathy.
Right.
And across your range, you want low range to be very buzzy, and you want to gradually get a less coarsely buzzy, more refined buzzy, and eventually totally smooth if you get high enough. There are acoustic reasons for that, but I'll leave it at that for now. That will be indicative of good chord function. If it's too buzzy, too high, you're screaming. If it's too smooth, too low, it'll be too weak. It won't have enough power.
Right.
So that's why you want to go from buzzy to sizzly to smooth. So I use what I call toddler complaint. And this is a good warm-up like thing. Toddler complaint is when that same toddler doesn't get its way. They make this sort of a nasally kind of a darkened, you want to do that very pleasurably. You don't try to drive it anywhere, stick it anywhere. Find the most pleasurable way to express your displeasure. Sort of dark and buzzy and said, it's right in the mouth. And then as you go up, it will migrate from that to kind of an and much smoother. And here's several things that happen. It goes from coarse to refined to almost smooth. It goes from to kind of and it goes from the mouth to sort of inside and up into the head at the same time that it stays relaxed down into the body, kind of like that. And I forgot one more. The affect is migrating as well. Down low, it's I'm going to complain till mommy gives me what I want. And and when that isn't working, now I'm going to try to make mommy feel sorry for me. So when I go high, it's the pathetic feel sorry for me, mommy. When I'm low, it's give me what I want, mommy, right? So, and if you play with that enough and play with the path in between, that kind of migration of vowel, auditory roughness, which is the buzziness, and sensation location, indirectly trains the larynx to go through all the stuff it needs to be doing, which we can't directly control.
Yeah. Now, why do you suppose it is? Because I've had this same experience with teaching young singers of where I can get them to make those sounds so much easier than if I go directly to the singing. And I know that intuitively to be true, but I've just never really understood or been able to explain why that's true.
So I will add one more to my language is the problem. Language is the problem, and pitch notation is the problem. So it's those two things that the brain has categorized differently than what I was just doing, which is just messing around with my voice and glissandoing all around. I'm going through language sounds, I'm going through pitch frequencies, but I'm not doing it so categorically and as quantally, sort of, as I do when I think I've got to do this vowel, I've got to do this pitch. And I think it's a programming problem, really, a brain programming problem.
Yeah.
So the more you can play around with sirening around and allowing the migrations to go where it feels the most pleasurable, and then try to carry that over to scalar pitch patterns and convince yourself to feel it the same way, you can make the transfer, but it is a bit of a process, but it's a process that's quite doable. I mean, we do it all the time, and I do that all the time with them, but they have to have enough experience with these migrations. What are my auditory and somatosensory targets? It just means my sound and sensation targets across the range for this vowel, and really learn what that is. This is called procedural knowledge. Procedural knowledge. For declarative knowledge is just the facts, ma'am, right? What are the facts? What's the objective information? But we don't sing with that. It informs our singing. We sing with the sensations. It's like, how do you ride a bike? Well, we can talk about gravity and weight, center of gravity and so forth, but I can tell you all that stuff, but that doesn't mean you can ride the bike now. You have to have felt what it feels like to balance your weight while you're moving forward. Same thing with that's called procedural knowledge, because procedural knowledge is utterly sensorial.
Yeah.
It's all sensory. It's all sensory. It's very hard to describe sometimes. Very hard to describe it precisely because it's sensorial, but that's the knowledge you need to sing with. So we teachers do the best we can to describe sensations and targets and so forth to help them accidentally have some good experiences. And then if they can have them often enough, they're no longer accidental. They can begin to.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great because you said accidentally making a good sound.
Yeah.
That is so common with young singers.
We are in the business of setting up good accidents. Until they're no longer accidents.
So one of the ways that we make our classrooms psychologically safe for vocal freedom and exploration and experimentation is by giving them those tools to describe what their body is doing in a way that I oftentimes describe as more similar to how clarinet players learn clarinet. When they are out of tune or it squeaks or squawks, it's an external thing to them. It's not their own body or their own instrument that is also tied to their personhood. It is a separate thing. And there's a lot of what we're doing when we teach a choir class that we want it to be personal and we want it to be connected to their self. But at the same time, we want them to just be able to tighten the ligature and wet the reed and blow harder. Or whatever it is, to keep that metaphor going, we want them to have a set of explanations for how their body functions. So, for example, if I have a student who is making a vowel that they think is supposed to be, and it's not, for whatever reason, the sound that's coming out is something else other than that, I might ask them questions about what their body's doing. I might ask them, where do you feel your tongue right now? Can you find the hole between your upper jaw and lower jaw back here by your ear? Can you find that? Can you feel it? Take your two thumbs. Can you feel it underneath your chin? Does it feel squishy or hard? And they start to answer those questions and come to the conclusion of what their should feel like and sound like, rather than me just telling them that it's wrong all the time. So one of the things that creates psychological safety is empowering them to be problem solvers with their sound. So I'm using the vowel as an example, but of course you could ask them questions about, where do you feel the resonance shifting? Do you feel like your body is vibrating, or do you not feel any vibration at all? If so, where do you feel it? Those types of questions can come as part of the rehearsal process, and eventually, as kids become more advanced and comfortable with each other and with the process, they can start to ask each other these types of questions as well. And one of my favorite activities in a safe classroom, once we've had a little bit of time to establish that safety, is to take kids who are volunteers out into the hall and give them a vocal problem to practice. A very collapsed soft palate, a hypernasal production, a breathy sound, a high larynx, super low larynx, whatever it is, and we can practice what that would sound like, and then have them come into the classroom and sing with that problem and allow other kids to practice this process. Ask them questions, try to guide them to the answer or to kind of diagnose the vocal fault, so to speak. So these are all tricks that I've used in the past to take these concepts that you just heard, the opening part of the episode, and steer the classroom in this productive but safe environment. In many ways, we're de-riskifying the room. So everything that we're teaching them about body alignment, about resonance, about airflow, and the way that should function, and all the things that we're teaching them when they learn their vocal affect, like you heard Beth and Ken Bozeman talking about in that episode earlier, all of these things become their vocabulary, their academic vocabulary with which to discuss openly the sounds that they are making and that their classmates are making. And in many ways, what this will start to do is also level the playing field for everyone in the room, because every choir class that we've ever taught or been in has the quote-unquote best singer. in the room, but everybody's got something that they could work on and something that they could help fix. And then it becomes more collaborative. So as we de-riskify the room, we also want to create that practice swing culture, which normalizes voice cracks, especially in the tenor bass kids that are younger, adolescent, changing male voices where the voice will crack a lot. Can you get them to the point where they are going to high five after that voice crack instead of cower in the corner? That's huge. We're normalizing practice swings. We're normalizing the practice swings of the shift and register and vocal experimentation as a data collection for the kids and not an evidence of a failure. That's really important, and it takes explicit conversations from the first day of school. And I don't mean conversations like sit down and let's talk about our feelings about what it feels like when we sing badly. Maybe sometimes you do that, but really it's preemptive. It's going into the beginning of a school year knowing that the concept related to failure in front of our peers is a huge touch point for kids where they already are afraid of it. You can take that to the bank. If you're a first year teacher, you've never done this before, you can take that to the bank before the first day of school. Kids will be afraid to fail in front of each other. And so part of the way you set that up, it's not easy. It's not as simple as just a phrase at the beginning of the school year, like "thank you for your mistake." It takes me pointing out that poster and telling stories about kids in the past who have been brave enough to make mistakes and how it impacted the rest of the group and made them a hero. Like we're creating a narrative around the importance of this practice swing culture and the non-risky sound making laboratory that we need. We want to structure our peer system for feedback. We want to establish classroom procedures where students can give and receive vocal feedback safely. And of course, in my environment, it's taken years to create this through our student-led sectionals, and that's probably one of the hardest places to do it, is because as soon as the teacher steps out of the room, the defensiveness increases even. But this is important for our student leadership to learn how to do this, where they can ask questions rather than condemn, and whether they can also lead with their own vulnerability about their own vocal issues, because that's the same thing I have to do when I'm teaching. And so we're trying to get to that equal footing where, yes, I'm the leader and the other teachers in the classroom are the leader. We are in charge, but everybody's really there to do the same thing. We're there to collaborate on a group performance at the end. And if they can buy into that, then that becomes the secret sauce. Other ingredients to the secret sauce to make all this work is sequence, repetition, and asking questions. The power of the sequence is in designing a vocal warm-up or a technique sequence that can naturally guide our voices into a free state without over-explaining everything. So yes, I've said often on the show that rote instruction is crucial to the process. It needs to happen at the right places in the right way to not impede literacy growth. But we definitely want to use our demonstrating voice to help them understand how to make a sound and what it should sound like and what it should feel like. I love, as an activity towards the beginning of a school year when we're trying to build this safe environment, the make a ridiculous noise game as part of a warm-up. And I don't have a great name for it. Maybe I should come up with a better name for it, better marketing. But the make a ridiculous noise game involves me making a ridiculous noise and then pointing to a kid who then has to try to mimic the noise. It can be whatever comes to your brain. You should not be overthinking it. And then once they've mimicked the noise, they get to create a new noise and point to someone else. And you want to get this to going around rapid fire around the room. Everybody's just making the most ridiculous noises. And you just tell them it has to come out of their mouth somehow. It can be anything. There's no rules with what the sound is other than what the school's rules are for appropriate noises. Sometimes you do have to make sure that they know that. But as they make that ridiculous noise, they start to laugh at each other. They start to laugh with each other. And it starts to normalize the idea that we will then, into our choir rehearsal, also be making ridiculous noises. I may oftentimes start that demonstration of how we should sing a certain song with a sound that will sound ridiculous to them, because it's not part of their cultural natural speech, as you heard me discussing with Ken. That's where that vocal affect and the demonstration, call and response becomes really, really important. And the rest of our vocal warm-ups then can happen in that safe environment where we're introducing not only new pitch patterns and rhythm patterns through our vocal warm-ups, but we're also introducing new sensations of resonance that they will have more success with if they fake it until they make it, so to speak, at the beginning. And that's also just creating an environment where, hey, guys, this is an experiment. There is not a expectation that the first time you do something, it's going to be the correct way. And that really goes a long way in the long run as rehearsals really heat up, especially with the beginners around November, at least in my experience. Then we can really start to apply some of these experimentations to speed up our process. So then, of course, it's the repetition. Once you get them over the fear, it's how many times can we get a repetition of that skill. So I'm going to give you an example. Let's say it's adolescent baritones and tenors trying to get up into their calling register or their head voice in a way that isn't stressful, straining, and, as Ken would say, pleasurable, a way that doesn't hurt for them. That is not going to be as simple as the first time they get it, they're done. They're going to have to repeat that and repeat it over and over and over in the same way that my baseball players have to repeat a good swing. Because if you do 10 good swings in a row and 4 bad ones, you got to start over. You got to go into the point where it happens that way every single time. And that's why our rehearsal sequencing hint in the next episode is going to be so important. We don't want the repetition to be mindless, though. And so I continue to come back to that. They're going to do a bunch of repetitions, but they're going to have some type of a feedback cycle in there. So we do the repetition, we ask questions, we try to solve a problem, we do it again, but it has to move quickly so that they're getting lots of repetitions within the class period. Now, if you have one of those 85-minute blocks, maybe you devote a portion of your rehearsal to this type of quick cycles, because you're not going to want to have them doing their head voice for 85 minutes. You choose a time that you're going to press the gas, is what I call it. We're going to press the gas, and we're going to have no pause rehearsals. No pause. We're not stopping to talk. We're not having side conversations. We're going to go through this cycle with no interruptions for some period of time to ensure that they have these repetitions that they need to form those neural pathways to the point where when the pressure's on, they can call upon the voice that they want, whatever it is, whether it's falsetto or a resonant chest voice or whatever it is that you're trying to teach them to do. Certain vowel sounds, they should be able to do them without thinking about them. Again, comes with repetition. But we're trying to shift away from telling the students what they did wrong to asking them what they experienced and letting them come to the conclusion on their own that it was wrong, if it was, or those exciting moments when they start to get it right, they come to the conclusion themselves that it's right is actually more powerful than you clapping for them. Again, we need all of those things, but I would argue that self-esteem and self-value ultimately comes from the self and not from a teacher. So when they learn this process of self-evaluation and then discover that, oh my goodness, I just made a beautiful noise and it was really, really good, I can tell. That's when you got them. That's when you got them hooked. So examples of these questions would be things like, where did you feel the resonance? Where do you feel your tongue? Where do you feel your shoulders right now? Do you feel like there's tension in your body? Can you get rid of it? There's all kinds of ways that you can guide them to conclusions without just flat out telling them. Other examples, what physical adjustment did you make to clean up that onset just now? Your first one was breathy. That one wasn't. What'd you do? And then these are conversations that are happening in front of the whole class. So then other students, even the ones that are not answering the question at that moment, start to feel like it's normal that they're experimenting with these things as well. And the snowball effect is powerful. Another important tool that they have when this process starts to normalize for them is just their own toolbox for themselves. The set of questions that they learn to ask themselves. Now, of course, body alignment, the anatomy of the vowel, which I've talked about quite a bit. Where are my body parts? What are they doing right now? They can learn to ask themselves a full battery of those types of questions, but then they also start to learn the more specific ones for their own voice gradually. But this is where kind of the premise of the episode sets up, where it's not a voice lesson. It's not really a voice lesson. Of course, if they were in a voice lesson, that's ideal, because then every set of questions and diagnostic tools are going to be very specific to their own voice. But we want to give them a very general one so that when the teacher's not in the room, they can go practice and they can have some sense of whether or not they're doing a good job. And as we all know, if we're singers, we can't really hear ourselves when we sing. We can hear ourselves if we record ourselves, which is another tool, but that's not really the kind of tool I'm talking about in this series. That it is a tool to tell them to use their voice memos on their phone and record themselves and listen back, and that's extremely valuable. But I also like the idea of teaching singers to learn how it feels, and have how it feels trump what it sounds like in their own head, because we don't get a very good sense from our own voice of what we actually sound like. We have to learn to go by feel. What if I've got a head cold on the day of the performance and I've got my resonators are all full of snot? I want to still be able to sing well, which means I have to be able to feel all the different parts of my body working together to be able to trust that my voice is functioning beautifully. So to kind of recap and pull all this together, what I'm having us think about for this set of tools, this functional vocal knowledge and vocal freedom tool, is that when we can decouple every single noise from our own personal sense of self-worth, then we can really dig in and do the work. We can ask ourselves the tough questions related to whether or not this was beautiful. And if it's not, then that's not a personal failure. It's because my jaw was in the wrong place, or because my tongue was in the wrong place, or I felt tension in a part of my body I shouldn't have, or I didn't have enough tension in a certain part of my body. They're learning to make those non-emotional, which is that if this is a tool, I have the tool, I can fix it. This is not a crisis. I just made a noise that wasn't pretty. That's fine. Let's move on to the next attempt. And that process of sequencing and repetition, along with the terminology that we've talked about in this episode, they have to all go together, because if they don't know how to apply the terminology, it's relatively useless. And if they're not in an environment where kids are normalizing the discussions about how we make things better, then it all really has to move together, which is why I like to call it a secret sauce. Sauces don't have one ingredient. They have many. And we have to mix all these things in just the right proportions, which is not easy and takes a lot of practice. So I have a challenge for you if you're listening to this episode. What is some set of terminology or set of questions or vocal affects from Ken and Beth, or concepts related to the group vocal instruction that you got earlier in the episode that you could take into your classroom when the school year starts and start using it right away? Because here's the thing. On this show, when I present these things, I am presenting them because I learned them here too. When I do an episode with Ken, or with my wife even, who knows way more about the voice than I do, I am taking these concepts and then I am trying to learn and experiment with them in my classroom. So there are many things about teaching choir over the many years that I've been doing it that I would feel comfortable saying that I'm an expert about. But that's because I did the work to get there. And that also means that I failed a bunch of times. And that means I tried a whole bunch of things that didn't work. I had to revamp entire school year systems where I had to just throw that whole school year out because it did not go very well in terms of student outcomes, and start again. And so the expertise that I am claiming here is hard fought. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because it's a direct corollary to what we've been talking about with building voices in a group setting. Your students will also fail a whole bunch of times. Your demonstrations might even sometimes fail. Your group product by the end of a school year, by the end of a concert session even, might fail. It might not be the sound that you or your students hoped to create. That can't result in less of a good attempt next time. And if they're in the habit of this rinse and repeat cycle of feedback and try again and feedback and try again, it inherently builds growth mindset. And that's what I'm hoping for all of you, but also for your students and for myself as I strive to work towards these things to make my own pedagogy better every year. I hope you found this useful. And of course, if you're hoping for more of the specific vocal pedagogical concepts, I didn't go too in-depth on anything in this episode because it's already there. Make sure you go to the website where I have separated all the Vocal Ped nerd stuff into one page where you can go to coralosophy.com/Vocal Ped, and all the episodes, including the ones you heard clipped there, but there's way more with great voice teachers and a variety of different voice science concepts and acoustical science and the physiology of the voice. There's tons of that there. So head to coralosophy.com/Vocal Ped if you want to go even deeper into the Vocal Ped nerdery. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Coralosophy checkout code. And of course, now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Coralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.